Okay, so yes, I'm Ian McGee, Commercial Director at Credit 360, and not too surprisingly, we are a software provider for sustainability software. I've paraphrased the subject line a little bit, just to focus really on the crux of it for me, which is why sustainability software. I'm keen to make this a bit more informative, not a sales pitch, so I'm going to talk in general terms about software, not specifically Credit 360, but of course I'm obliged to tell you a little bit about us, but I keep that to a bare minimum, just a few moments. So taking it from the top, Credit 360 has been around for 10 years. The only thing we do is sustainability software, so no other forms of software. We're also not a consultancy-led business. We focus on the tools, but as individuals, we all come from the field. We've already had my background read out there. We have other team members that specialise in community involvement, carbon management, EHS data. The overarching point being we're a little bit more than a software company. We do understand these issues and we work in this domain. Consistently profitable growth over the past 10 years, we put that distinction in because it's quite a confusing marketplace. Lots of small vendors cropping up, venture capital backed, people moving in and out of the market. Whereas we've been here for 10 years and we intend to be around for a lot longer. No one can pull the plug on us. We're a global company. You can see the office breakdown there on the screen. HQs in the UK, in Cambridge, then regional offices in each of those time zones. Typically, we deliver what is called SaaS, so software as a service. So we're managing the application for you on our secure servers, and you access it all through a web browser. 4 logos here, I dare say most of you will be familiar with, just to quickly rattle through them. We are CDP accredited to a gold standard, independent testing of our ability to manage scopes 1, 2 and 3 carbon calculations. We are GRI certified, Energy Star partners of the EPA in the US, and recent winners of the Ethical Corporation Best Sustainability Software Award. The shameless logo drop. We have 110 clients globally. This is a pretty random selection, a bit more of a UK spin. It's pretty diverse, so all kinds of sectors, extractives, manufacturing, through to retail, real estate, banking, so pretty diverse. All of these we're working with on a global level as well. It's not regional divisions. So pretty expansive client base, much more comprehensive list on the website. Final thing about us, as we get into kind of the meat of the presentation, we're not just about energy and carbon, which again makes us a little bit different to some other software providers out there. The slightly cryptic company name, which I think some of us slightly regret now, but it is what it is, 360-degree view of sustainability. So looking at EHS incident management for OSHA and RIDDLE, carbon, supplier engagement, community involvement, but doing all of that in one system rather than fragmenting out to different places. And that's why we have modules that deal with these different 5 core areas that are highlighted there. Great, so let's move beyond that, put that bit behind us. What I want to focus on now. So there are many reasons why we believe software is a better way to manage this data. The alternative is Excel, which is something we're going to pick up on a little bit later. To explore one of the themes why we think it's important, data quality. 3 classic examples here. I think lots of people have heard the first one before. This came from a study by Leeds University in 2011 that ripped apart 3,000 CSR reports and found 800 errors, significant errors in some. Top one's my favourite. NL reported their global emissions 2009 as being 4 times that of the world's total emissions. Consistently in ABB misstating by a multitude of 1,000 out on their sulfur emissions. These are systematic errors. They're not transpositional. It means they're calculating data incorrectly. So you might say, why is data quality important? I would argue probably 5 or 6 years ago, it maybe wasn't, because a lot of people weren't reading these reports anyway. That landscape has started to change. And why do I think that's important? 3 basic rules. First, the golden rule, share data at the quality at which you expect to receive it. How can we expect to be seen as credible if we're putting out carbon data that is poor and inaccurate? Secondly, you can't manage a report with poor data. So if you're getting poor data in, you're not only laying down your stakeholders, it means your monthly, your quarterly reports, your internal performance management is potentially flawed as well. Third and finally, stakeholders are now using this data. It isn't just a game of putting out the CSR report and ticking the box. Unfortunately, that landscape has changed as well. Lots of stakeholders are looking at this data. I'm not going to go through all of them. That'll take a very long time. Let's pick on one of my favourite ones, which is SRI analysts, the investment community. This mythical beast that apparently uses all this data that we produce, but no one can actually prove it. I think a few years ago, this was a kind of dialogue. I used to speak to SRI analysts about this 4 or 5 years ago. Companies were putting out sustainability data voluntarily and without standardization. The analysts would turn around and say, great, yeah, what does it mean? Companies would say, why do I have to tell you I'm volunteering it? So finally, they would say the magic phrase, I'll factor it in. That's what SRI analysts were doing with that data. We didn't really know what they were doing, probably not a great deal. Whereas the landscape today, And this is a pretty crazy diagram that I knocked up, but hopefully you get the idea what's going on. In between companies and investors, we now have a whole raft of industries, data aggregators, synthesizers, analysts, disseminators. Really significant ones for me, Bloomberg, putting out CDP data to 300,000 Bloomberg terminals, reaching all mainstream analysts. So this data can't be hidden anymore. People are grabbing it, taking it from you, mashing it together, analyzing it, sharing it. And to me, that's one of the key reasons why using the right tools for sustainability software is key to getting the right data out there, because people are taking it seriously, and so should we. So to pick a quote from the GreenBiz founder, Joel Makua, when will sustainability reporting ever grow up? What I think it takes, one is assurance, which is a subject of a whole different session, integration with financial data, improved standards, mandatory disclosure, which feeds nicely into our next session on UK mandated carbon disclosure. I think that's really important in the landscape. Then fit for purpose tools. You wouldn't manage your financial data with Excel. Why would you manage your carbon data with Excel? So hopefully I'm going to try and convince you now that maybe using specialist tools is a better way to handle the complexity of carbon data. Very, very quickly, I don't suggest reading this, there's far too much on here, but just to break down quickly what we mean by sustainability software. Any type of application that is dedicated to collecting and managing non-financial data. It essentially comes in two flavors. SaaS, I've already mentioned, which is our preference, software as a service. It's cheaper to implement, it's quicker to implement, it's easier to support. Installed means you put it on premise, so you pick it up effectively in a disk and run it on your own servers. Very expensive for you guys to maintain and acquire the hardware. But two different ways, and pros and cons to either way, which I'm not going to go into in detail now. Who's using software? Anyone's guess, really. We'd be really keen to know, but it's a bit of a mystery. Firstly, it's very confusing nomenclature. People refer to EHS software, sustainability software, carbon software. A lot of it's semantic. It's all the same thing, but it's quite hard to draw those lines between them. The recent study from Ernst & Young they didn't actually declare which companies they surveyed, but I think it was the largest 300 by the FT 500, global FT 500. 24% of those companies surveyed said they were using specialist tools. They didn't say for the other 76 what they were using, but it's fair to assume it was Excel. And I think as you go to smaller companies outside those global FT 500, it's almost exclusively Excel. So what I want to do is explore why Excel is not a hugely good tool at doing these kind of things, and I'm going to explore it through these three different themes. So conceptually, this is what a system does, not just Credit 360, conceptually any system. Gathering data in from across your business to one central location, then feeding out to internal and external stakeholders. We break it down into gather, analyze, and communicate. So let's take those three themes and start looking at Excel versus software against those themes. First and foremost, data collection. This is a biggie for me. Excel is not a data collection tool. It's a very powerful analysis tool, but it's very poor at using for data collection. What you end up doing is sending out templates to lots of people all across your business, perhaps hundreds, if not thousands of people. There's no quality control. You're doing it all via email. There's no real audit trail. And also the potential for people to break an Excel data collection sheet is very high. And you get very simple errors like unit of measure, variances, keying in too many zeros. So software above that can do things like providing workflow, so automated emails to chase data, approval stops. Also on the screenshot here, unit of measure conversions, tolerance checking as well, so defining rules when you think a number is going to be out of variance, you can flag that up at the point it's entered to the system, not at the end of a 3-month process of collecting it in Excel. You're doing it on the fly right there in the application. Audit trails as well, if you want to get your data verified. As you're probably aware, about a third of reports have external assurance to some grade or another. Getting external assurance is a very timely and cost-intensive exercise, and if you're using Excel, time and cost just increases because your auditors are going through, collecting lots of spreadsheets, going through audit trails, through email trails. Whereas within a system, you have one secure location with all the data fully audit trailed in a way that can be searched. So it supports good assurance of data. Again, another biggie, Excel isn't anything in itself, it's what you put into it. It's not a tool for automating data collection. When you move into the software world, you get interesting opportunities to pull data straight from the smart meter, from your utility provider, from the Energy Bureau, or from existing systems like SAP or travel systems. Lots of cool ways to move data across automatically. And there's never a silver bullet for those integrations. There's always picking your battles, but all of it's possible. We do it with lots of companies, and I can maybe cite some examples a little bit later on. So that was data collection. On the analysis side, it gets a little bit tougher because Excel is a very powerful analytical tool, as I've already said. What it doesn't do, it doesn't have inbuilt knowledge. So Excel doesn't come off the shelf with your carbon conversion factors. It's not going to maintain the DEC or the IEA factors for you. It won't keep them updated. Also, the calculations you'll be building, and they're very easy to break. And also the person that builds those calculations and stores those factors, they effectively own that spreadsheet then. When they leave the business, when they get bored of looking after it, no one's there to help you. Now that can work for a certain amount of time, but if after 2, 3, 4 years, as the frequency of data collection increases, that's increasing stress on you guys without the external support of keeping the application up to date. And in simple terms, with a system like ours, we'll keep those factors up to date for you. We maintain them and update them. We make sure they're accurate. That is what our CDP accreditation is all about. The calculations will be systemized, so they're reducing the potential for human error. And all of the calculations will be audit trailed in exactly the same way as the input data was. So putting a little bit more structure around that. Also really cool stuff like leveraging third-party data, so pulling in thousands, even millions of rows of travel data. So I went from this office to this office, or this airport to this airport. We will process that en masse and use Google Map APIs to work out road distance, IATA codes to work out Great Circle distance for flights, shipping lane data. Again, software doesn't come with any of that inbuilt information. Sorry, software does. Excel does not come with that inbuilt information. That is the power of software, processing lots of data quickly and using intelligent third-party tools. Communication as well. Again, Excel can build charts, very pretty, quite flexible. Not a great way of storing and sharing information though. It's just all within the Excel file. You're relying on someone going to open the Excel file and look at the information and copy paste it out. A good piece of software will give you the ability to build standardized dashboards and reports, so you just have to log in and view the information right there. It's going to be live. Also publishing information live out to client websites as well. So you can actually share information with stakeholders on the fly rather than having to manually export it out, send it to a designer, put it in a report, and 6 months later see the values. We're working with companies like O2 and Telefonica doing monthly updates live from their underlying Credit 360 system to their public-facing website. So in my mind, a smarter way of reporting sustainability information. Spatial tools as well. Again, Excel is not famously good at this. So looking at heat mapping, more visually intuitive ways of looking where your outliers are, where the performance issues are, whether it be carbon or even social issues. Looking at lane data here as well, so going through the supply chain, looking at provenance for your products. Again, plotting that spatially, you really need to look at the data in that way to understand the impacts of lane data. Finally, we've only really been talking about quantitative data. A big part of CSR and carbon management is qualitative information, wrapping the story around the numbers. So you need tools to help you with that. Now with Excel, that just means typing into a notes field. Using online tools, we can use wiki-based systems like this. This is our corporate reporter module. So having sections of a report, farming it out to different people, and collecting with track changes qualitative information connected back to the hard data. So managing the numbers and the story in one place with a sense of workflow and that audit trail again. And so here's really nice examples as well, and I think these slides are going to be shared, so if you want to look, these are live, they're published. Some examples of where we're doing the front-facing bits, as I mentioned earlier, communications tools put live on client websites. This is Whistler 2020, the Canadian municipality, and Telefonica, the global telecoms group. Final thing I want to pick up on now, we're also partners of the Carbon Trust, who of course are co-organisers of this event. With the Carbon Trust, we open up a whole other potential area of using software, and that is modelling. So at the moment, I've just been talking about collecting energy data and doing carbon calculations. With Scope 3 emissions, as I'm sure some of you have seen this diagram before, looking at 15 categories, very diverse source of information, quite esoteric concepts. What you need to do there is start modelling. And the Carbon Trust obviously have 10 years of experience of modelling using economic input-output data, their own models on top of that. Once you wrap software around that, we can start doing very clever things, like processing very large amounts of procurement data and matching that back to EIO codes to work out the emissions within your value chain. And we're using what's called, well, a concept that we call hotspotting. So if you want to engage with your Scope 3 emissions, you've never done it before, where do you start with those 15 categories and with very little data? Hotspotting is one option. Using very minimal information about your organisation, so your full-time employees, your revenues, and how they're distributed geographically, using our Hotspotter tool that we've developed with the Carbon Trust, you can very quickly return an indicative Scope 3 profile and work out which of those 15 categories are probably going to be your hotspots. So that means you can then focus your time and attention on drilling into those and getting some primary data from actual suppliers if it's purchased goods and services. Probably no need for me to conclude too heavily, but hopefully you got the sense that Excel, we don't feel is a great tool. It's not a system in itself. There's no inbuilt knowledge. It's easily broken. Counter argument is it's free. I would say great, try it if it's free. There's nothing to lose. See where you get with it. A lot of companies do get away with it, particularly if you're smaller organisations. But I think as the frequency of the data collection increases, as the number of indicators you have to manage increases, eventually Excel will not be fit for purpose. And that's when I think you should be looking at specialist tools, not exclusively Credit 360. There are lots of options out there. Obviously, we're pretty proud of what we do, but we're not the only option. And the final point would be, you think Excel's tricky within your organisation, just wait till you start looking at supply chain data, where there's much less drive to put data. You don't really have the stick anymore. The quality of the data drops off, the engagement drops off. So I think when you start reaching into the supply chain, all of these arguments are just exacerbated. It's going to be even harder, even greater need for specialist software tools. So with that, thank you for your time. I hope that was useful.
Let me kick off, Ian. You talked about financial analysts using this information, and you talked about them factoring this information in, and you then said that they've moved on from that position. Can you give us some real examples of how this type of data is factored in and how it can influence decisions that would be important for anyone in this room, I should imagine?
Unfortunately, there's very little evidence of it. I think the best study was by the Goldman Sachs GS Sustain team, who there's been a lot of research suggesting that companies that do well on sustainability do well financially, but explaining causality is obviously a very different matter. We know the two states coexist. That's pretty well proven. GS Sustain looked at kind of 5-year trends and suggested that managing the sustainability issues does drive company performance. But I think it's just used as a proxy measure. So it's another dimension by which you can measure the success of a company. Once you've looked at kind of 5 oil and gas codes and you've looked at all the financial data, all the balance sheets, it's just another attribute by which to say, well, we know if you're managing your carbon well, you're a well-organised, well-managed organisation. So that's more of a proxy thing. I still don't think analysts do use the actual data to compare, and that's a consistency issue, because you can't take 5 oil and gas reports, rip out the total emissions and compare like for like, because there'll be apples and pears. One of them will be excluding flaring in Nigeria, the other will be excluding some Scope 3 categories. So there's just a lack of consistency there, which is a challenge for all of us as an industry to deal with.
Okay.
You're talking about doing some complex modelling, but where in your system do you allow the options to do modelling and scenario forecasting?
So we have, well, without going too specific, we do have 2 modules that deal with that. We do it from grassroots and top down. So in simple terms, we have initiative tracking, so planning projects to swap out the light bulbs in this building, working out your ROI and your payback period for that, project managing monthly updates, and then saying what would happen if I scaled that across all of my European operations.
So when is there options to build in probabilistic risk?
Yep. So the top down is doing more macro conditions. So it's saying I'm going to assume an incremental 2% decarbonisation of the UK economy and factoring multiple variables.
But can you not do a bottom-up Monte Carlo analysis on using your system? Because at the moment what you're doing is looking at in the past and building that data through. But when you need to actually do forecasting and building the bottom-up picture tends to be more robust.
Yep, so the Monte Carlo analysis specifically is coming out there are 2 versions of the Carbon Trust product we've launched. Hotspotter is a very simple one, quick indicative Scope 3 profile. The Value Chain Manager that's coming out next month. I think that's in the version 1.1, which will be in the spring. Monte Carlo analysis is part of that complex scenario planning. I'm not a mathematician enough to justify that further, but we've got some guys from the Carbon Trust here, and I'm sure they'll be happy to run you through that.
Okay. Any more questions? Yes? Ewan, we'll come back to you. Okay.
How much does it cost?
If you could just introduce yourself, actually.
Sorry,
Yeah. Okay.
Obviously, it's variable. If I were to give you an indication, we tend to work with 3-year contracts. It would be, if you're just going for basic collection, reporting of Scope 1, Scope 2 data, somewhere in the region of £100,000, 3-year total. £100,000, 3-year total. So that would be all license fees, training, import of historic data, support. It can be a lot less, it can be a lot more, but that's a reasonable average starting point.
Hi, my name is I was just wondering, the use of the software, Is there any particular industries or organisations where it's particularly
Yes, I mean it is sector agnostic, so you build indicators relevant to your sector. But I think traditionally some of the heavier extractives, so mining companies, not necessarily because software can't deal with that complexity, it's just they've been such heavily regulated industries for so long. They've often built in-house homegrown systems over the past 15, 20 years, which maybe they don't particularly like, but they're embedded and they work well enough. Whereas with financial services clients, this is relatively, comparatively new to them compared with extractives.
I work specifically in the shipping industry, and obviously there's a lot of competitive ownership, and sort of getting into production states, etc. Is there any confusion in terms of emissions?
We use concepts of apportionment, so you can have varying levels of ownership on a per asset basis, and that level of ownership can change through time, and the emissions will be apportioned against that. It's essentially a financial concept, exactly. Yeah.
Any more questions from the floor? We've got some time. Yes.
I'm sure we'll stop this time. It's on the use of napkins. Maybe it's actually not great. Is there a possibility, as you're saying, about having about data collection to actually link in with smart systems to in an installation that actually records the emissions as well? So real-time data gathering, not from someone inputting a screen through a web browser.
Yep. Two specific examples, Danske Bank and also H&M we work with globally. So in both of those situations we're collecting 15-minute interval data straight from smart meters. Different options there. You can go down to the smart meter directly. Smart meter technology is a little bit hit and miss at the moment. There's very little standardization. You can also go back to the utility provider and collect what's called EDI files, or EDI-EL in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe. So different options there. But yes, we do very high frequency data with triggering alarms at 15-minute, half-hourly intervals.
Any last questions out there? Okay.
No, we haven't. We are not by design. Just we haven't ever been approached by them, to be honest. We've been focusing on corporates.
Any more out there on the floor? We've got a few minutes, otherwise we'll break. Okay. Well, thank you, Ian. That was very interesting talk. So if we could just thank the speaker again.